Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector as we explore their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke into the space industry. Today on the podcast, we're joined by one of EVONA's very own strategic advisors, Jeff Crusey. As an experienced deep tech venture capitalist, Jeff specialises in solving significant real-world problems across the realms of space, defence, climate, energy, cybersecurity, advanced computing, AR, VR, and beyond. Jeff is the founder and general partner of Farpoint, an early-stage deep tech venture capital firm focused on global security and resilience. Prior to starting his investment fund, Jeff was Seraphim Capital's investment director, working on over 20 rounds of investment into space tech startups. Seraphim actually collaborated with Amazon Web Services to create the AWS Space Accelerator, which was a 4-week business support program providing technical, business, and mentoring services to space startups across the globe. In this episode, we discuss the various stops on Jeff's career journey and the lessons he learned along the way. Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Good. It's been a while. How you been?
I know, yeah, I was going to say, since the AWS piece, yeah, really good, thanks. I think I just joined when we spoke. I think you were the first person I ever spoke to within the company. Come a long way since then. How have you been? I've seen lots of exciting stuff going on LinkedIn on your end.
Yeah, just busy with fundraising. Nothing new to report there, really.
Yeah, very exciting for most people outside of the sector. Really excited to speak about kind of your origin story and your current role in the sector, because I know you have your fingers in multiple pies across the sector. It's more than most. I'd say you probably are the most out of everyone we've had on so far. So yeah, really looking forward.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, really looking forward to kind of diving into that. Well, this is where we start with everyone. I think it's the perfect place just to kind of outline where you started your journey. If you don't mind, we'll kind of jump straight in with the early days of Jeff Crusey. So yeah, talk us through kind of where you started in life, where you grew up, school, college, and how you found your way into your early career.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in San Diego, California. Grew up in a family of doctors / athletes. Lots of sports early on. Was a football player and a wrestler. Went to college to play football at Penn, but ended up deciding that I wanted to keep my mental faculty and avoid the concussions, and focus on school. And it's funny enough, actually, a friend reminded me of this the other day, that I went to Wharton undergrad, and there was a silly requisite class that I left to the last minute my senior year, and it was called Venture Initiation. And the whole project was to write a business plan and present it to a panel of actual VCs, and that's how we'd get our grade for the most part. And I didn't have the greatest team in the world, and they didn't really work on the project much. So I had asked the professor to let me redo the project on my own, and he did. However, I had to spend my graduation while everyone else is out enjoying themselves redoing this entire project, swearing I would never work on another business plan. I didn't care about startups or anything like that. And that I was going to go work in high finance or something highfalutin like that. But yeah, ironically, here I am working with startups on a daily basis, and it turns out it's actually where I really enjoy spending most of my time. I had gotten into biomedical investment banking early on, just given my experience leading up to that point, in working at a clinical research organization running FDA trials on devices and pharmaceuticals. But around 2008, decided climate was more important to me. Headed to Detroit, Michigan, of all places, to run a corporate venture arm of a utility out there. After which I went to go work at a bunch of startups because, I really enjoyed the venture capital profession, but I felt that I needed to get more operational and technical experience, and that I would come to it full circle at some point. So I departed and went to go work at a series of startups developing different kinds of technology. And it was really just a random walk of my current interests. So at that point in time, I'd grown up a gamer my whole life. So I thought AR, VR were going to make a comeback. I wanted to be involved in that. I thought micro LED micro displays had an important role to play in that, the evolution of that market. So did some informal training on the semiconductor side so I could design some of the tooling and devices to build these displays. And did that for a while. Then I joined another startup working on natural language processing for ad delivery and threat detection online. After which I co-founded a startup of my own working on computer vision optics for next generation headsets. And it was around that time when I started working with some space startups on the side because it just was sort of interesting and involved some of my background. So the first one was a friend that wanted to work on developing on-orbit manufacturing of semiconductors. So I contributed some of my background there, and then worked with another team that wanted to do a redesign of a thruster, but we eventually turned it into a very low Earth orbit imaging company. And so that was sort of my early introduction there. And it was actually around the time Facebook and Google were talking about spreading connectivity all over the world using balloons and drones, which I thought sounded strange because we could use satellites to do that more efficiently, I thought, and ended up spending a bunch of time over at Viasat, where I knew some people, bothering them probably so much to the point that they said, fine, we'll give you a job on our strategy team if you just start answering some of these questions for yourself. So I was on the corporate development strategy team over there for a short period before actually somebody from the AR VR world that I had worked with previously reached out. And so this gentleman, Michael Jones, he was one of the founders of a company called Keyhole that became Google Earth by acquisition. And I got to know him actually because he spun out much of that same team as a company called Niantic, the makers of Pokemon Go, who are heavily involved, in the AR VR side of things. And it's fun. You can sort of see the intersection of geospatial and AR VR there. But when he heard I was over at Viasat, started to see if I wanted to join Seraphim Capital out in London. And so, I thought it was an interesting time because Seraphim Capital was still pretty early on and they needed some help getting plugged into the American market and sort of revamping their deal flow in that regard. So joined the team at a very interesting time, specifically because it was right around the time COVID hit. And it was really an existential threat, and we needed to decide what our strategy moving forward was. And we decided to accelerate our investment pace and ended up doing a lot of investments over 2020, 2021, 2022. And even ended up co-founding the AWS Space Accelerator with one of my lifelong friends, Mike Moreno, over at AWS. And then eventually took the fund public on the London Stock Exchange, raising about 250 million pounds. So it was quite, the quick rise in terms of being in a market that really, I think was pretty hyped over the last 2 years, but I think for good reason, given the change in geopolitics and sort of the near peer competition we're facing, especially with regard to Europe. So I think it's much needed attention that investors are giving more to space these days.
Yeah, absolutely. My God, that is so interesting. What a start you had to your career. It sounds like you were just really motivated, very passionate. Didn't necessarily, I guess you had a lot of kind of interests and passions at that point earlier on. Just said yes, and look where it's taken you. So that's the incredible kind of journey. So how does that compare to what you're doing right now in the space? That's kind of your current roles and projects. What does that look like in comparison?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, they specialize in their careers, right? And I think that's important for a lot of reasons. But I think I took a little bit of a counterintuitive approach where I said, I'm just going to focus on the solutions to problems. I don't care what the technology is, that will solve itself, or we'll help figure that out. But we don't want to be market chasing, or we don't want to be technology chasing a market. We don't want to be solving very specific problems. And I think that's really the key. And so, one of the things I noticed when I was in at Seraphim working specifically on space tech was there's a lot of adjacent areas that are also very important that are reemerging right now. that we need to invest in. So, that kind of surfaces from a lot of the climate or the crises we're seeing around the world with regards to things like health crises, with pandemic breakouts. We're seeing labor shortages. We're seeing inflation and energy costs go through the roof. And I think, one of the important aspects of the pursuit of technology is that when utilized appropriately, it can serve as stabilizing factor, providing more resilience. And a good example of that is, perhaps if there was more energy sovereignty in Western or Eastern Europe, perhaps Russia might not have been as inclined to invade. And so we can sort of see how technology interplays with stability and resilience. And that's sort of what led me to what I'm doing nowadays, which is Farpoint, raising an early stage deep tech fund. And we're focusing on aerospace and defense more broadly than I had in the past. And then a few other areas, including climate and energy, cybersecurity, and advanced computing. The last two categories sort of being difficult to avoid in discussion when talking about the first two categories. So it's really important that we think about how things like AI and cybersecurity are being affected within aerospace, defense, and climate, and sort of why we decided to go with that focus. But more importantly, we've actually worked in all of these industries, and we've worked at startups and developed technology and actually invested in these different sectors. So we have a lot of muscle memory already built in, and it's not as if we're fair weather friends or tourist investors. We've been doing this our whole career.
Yeah, absolutely. Got your experience. I'm just so, every time I hear about the jobs you're doing, I would just love to be involved in something like that. It's so interesting, and you're so kind of at the forefront. So keeping it kind of within, I know, as you said, it kind of branches out over multiple sectors. Thinking kind of specifically within kind of space, aerospace and defense, these kind of sectors, now that you have kind of come on this journey, you've really kind of found your footing and your niche, and like you said, focusing on solutions and what you're clearly very talented and have been very successful at. Specifically within the space industry that you're kind of embedded within, what is it that you would say that you love the most about the space sector?
I mean, it's sort of the wild, wild west right now. Still, there's literally very few rules governing what's going on in orbit, other than physics. And so there's a wide surface area for solutions, especially as and I hate to point this out, but especially given the near peer competition with China and Russia, it's really driving more focus on that theater, especially as it becomes more part of conflict. For example, one of the opening moves we saw for Russia in the invasion of Ukraine was jamming a lot of satellite communications, and there we can start to see where space is actually playing a more important role within geopolitics today. So I think it's really interesting from that aspect too, because it's almost like a forcing function in terms of solutions. It's unfortunate that it has to be something like conflict, but that is one of the effects it has.
Yeah, completely. That's that's an interesting one, actually. That's not that's an interesting kind of side to come at that from. Usually I get stargazing. I love stargazing. I love looking at the stars. But that's interesting. And obviously, well, you're quite niche in what you're doing. I think I don't think we've really had anyone on here yet that kind of does the kind of work you're doing. So it's really great we get such a range of answers to this question when we ask people what they love the most about the sector. And that's what I really enjoy hearing from people in their kind of specific niches. And it's really nice, I think, for people listening who kind of share this same passion and love for space, to kind of hear about what people like you love and how they kind of got into this industry, to maybe follow in the same footsteps. Because one of the main motives of us actually starting this podcast is to demystify the sector and to make space accessible for everyone, because we think that there is space for everyone and there is a place for everyone, regardless of your skill. And a really hot topic across the industry at the moment is kind of the battle for talent and getting the best and brightest to kind of drive your company forward. And what more we can also be doing to make sure companies are getting the skills they need. On the very hot topic of this, and a kind of sub-hot topic within this, is kind of impacting change through STEM movements and kind of STEM programs at which I know a lot of people across the industry think this, need to really, to make an impact, we think we need to be kind of starting at a younger age here with, like elementary school children, primary school children, wherever you are, whatever you call it, these young kids, we need to be kind of getting them feeling passionate about this and kind of getting them in hands-on experience, because that is what's going to drive the growth of the sector from years to come, is this kind of diverse skill sets and experiences that we can nurture and bring into the sector. So from your kind of standpoint in the industry and your view and your experience, what do you think we could be doing differently across the sector and at that younger STEM level to be kind of impacting change now and for the future of the sector?
So I think, at the earlier ages, I do think it needs to be a topic, or well, not a topic, but a series of topics that's introduced earlier, because I do think it can inspire more interest in the STEM areas. And I think, at least in the US, a lot of times we baby children when they can absorb a lot more than we're giving them. And in the areas of math, computer science, and chemistry, all the different fields that go into space technology, I do think we can start earlier. I think that'll get people better prepared as they think about going into college, which is, I get why a lot of people go to college without knowing exactly what they want to do, and that it really is a gift if you do know what you want to do at that age. But what, I think there are a lot of people that really do know what they want to do at that age, and having a general physics degree, sure, that's okay, but it doesn't really get you focused and specifically prepared to be in that workforce. And so I think eventually it would be nice to start seeing something that's more like a space focused university, actually, because I do think there will be a large talent pool that needs to be curated over time. Otherwise we will run into more shortages like we've seen in the past few years. But more currently, I think one of the things that we can also be doing is, there's brilliant people everywhere, and not in space. I mean, I've met so many people that started off, working at JPL or NASA, who ended up on, working on some kind of an app, consumer app of some sort. And I think that tide is turning now, given some of the geopolitical importance around space tech and people coming back to that profession. More out of mission and personal interest. But I think there needs to be a better job at reabsorbing a lot of people from the tech industry that are being laid off, that have the skill sets that can be currently leveraged for the plethora of space tech startups out there today, and at a better cost basis, hopefully, because it's hard to get a startup off the ground when you're competing with folks that work at for talent that, it's like Google making $1 million a year. That's just not a realistic proposition for most startups. So I think, reabsorbing a lot of that workforce will, and currently being laid off will be a big advantage. And then moving forward, I think there's a lot of fun things we can do, because it's not just hardcore training and engineering. People need to enjoy it as well, right? And so I think there's a lot of fun things, like, I remember when I was growing up, space camp was like the end all be all. Everyone wanted to go to space camp in Florida. I unfortunately didn't get to go, but I know a lot of people that went. And it was this brilliant, amazing experience. And I think it did inspire a lot of young children to want to go in that direction. And so I think, it would be great to have a more, updated version of something like that. Perhaps there's like a VR space camp, anybody can participate or something like that. And then they graduate into sort of like human space flight training program, in college somewhere, and then they can go on to be an astronaut, and on a private mission somewhere at some point. And so creating that pathway and that light, I think, will also be a big boost to the industry, because then you can start to include more and more people. It doesn't have to be the hardcore PhDs necessarily. And perhaps maybe those students will become the hardcore PhDs at some point down the road. But I think opening up that realm of possibilities earlier on will be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting point about kind of the VR education. Maybe you're the man for the job. You've probably got the. Maybe you should run with that, and that sounds like a great idea. And it could, like we said, kind of getting people from all over the world involved and getting all these diverse skills. And I really think you made a really good point before about kind of reabsorbing skills across different industries. And, you know, I think identifying transferable skills is so key, because it kind of opens people's minds up to, you know, you don't have to follow one path, and where it takes you, that's where you'll land, and you've trained in that one thing and that's all you can do. With this, I think it can open up so many different pathways for people to do so many different things that probably never crossed their mind. I think that's a huge part of kind of, you know, demystifying the space sector. So kind of in the same arm of the previous question. So really, we want to be, you know, talking about making space accessible for everyone and demystifying that. And I think a very important part of that is transparency from people in kind of more senior positions, and people who have made mistakes and have learned from their own journey. I think a lot of people are quite quick to brush that under the carpet, because maybe they don't want to promote their own failures, or they don't want to, maybe they're trying to convince themselves it never happened, potentially the latter. So this is something that we ask everyone. It's a really interesting one. So in your journey that we've discussed so far, the kind of the way you started out, where you've come to now, what would you say was your biggest failure so far? Strong word. What did you learn from that? And then on the other side of the fence, what is your biggest achievement in your career to date?
My biggest failure career-wise, this is like it's not space related, but it was an important lesson that I learned pretty early on. So I was at a climate tech fund. I wanted to go work at a more traditional Silicon Valley fund at one point. And so I was called in to interview, and I was given sort of a case study style interview. And I was asked to analyze a potential investment into a company called Pandora. I think a lot of people might remember the internet radio company Pandora. And this was right, you know, not that long after Spotify had been founded. And I mean, not many people had heard of it at that point in time, because it was just a tiny little startup. But I decided that I was going to instead pitch them on Spotify, because I wanted to impress them with my industry insight and knowledge and understanding, and argue why. I was basically like laughed out of the interview. And and it's fair enough. I mean, they said that's not what we asked you to do. which
I can see though,
totally
it's clever. You would think you're trying to stand out from the crowd. I laughed out of the interview. It's a bit harsh, but I can see what you're trying to do there.
But what I think I learned was, you know, years later, I had basically just left that interview and forgot all about it and moved on with my life. But if I really honestly believed what I was saying to them about this company, Spotify, then I should have taken the initiative to go out, find Spotify, figure out a way to get them funded, and not sit there in an academic process and it get stuck there. And so that was when I decided that, you know, I'm not going to sort of wait around for people to do things. If I have conviction and I really do believe in something, and, you know, I've argued myself, you know, into that conviction, then that's where I need to go focus my time. And that was thankfully early on in my career, and that I think was pretty transformational, in that I just learned nobody's going to do it for me. I just need to figure out how to do it myself, and just figure out how to do it and not waste time. So that was definitely my biggest failure, because like I probably would be a lot wealthier person now if I had understood that.
I was gonna say you'd literally be probably sat in a palace right now on a golden throne. That would be a pretty good train to jump on early. But as you said, you learned the lesson for it, and you know, if you've got that conviction and you believe in it, just go for it. But you know, you've seized opportunities since then, so learning curve.
Absolutely. And you know, and that's just one of most of my failures. I would say my career is probably marked more by failures than it is successes at this point. But I'm fine with that. Like that doesn't worry or scare me. That's just a part of being involved in startups.
Yeah, very true. So on a more positive note, what's your biggest success? What are you the most proud of? Biggest achievement?
Um, I get a lot of energy from seeing people flourish, go from somebody that might not have believed in themselves to somebody that has a healthy level of confidence and can self-actuate. And I think, there was this one time when I was working at a fund and I was working with this analyst, and it was just clear to me that this particular analyst genuinely was so understated, was a brilliant individual, had lots of great ideas, but they were just struggling to articulate any of it because they had this crazy idea in their head that they weren't as experienced or didn't know as much or didn't understand, didn't have the aptitude to be good at their job yet because they were just a lowly analyst. And I thought that was insane. I thought this person was probably one of the most analytical individuals I've ever met in my entire life. But, could really just come up the learning curve faster than just about anybody I've ever met in any profession. Um, and so giving that person the right tools to succeed was probably one of my biggest successes, because not only is it awesome to watch somebody really take off on their own, but it's really fun to just sort of be a part of that, and it's not totally selfless, because now I have a friend that's wildly successful in their career that I get to work with, and work alongside, as an investor. So it really does. It's fun to sort of like build up your world around you that way.
Yeah, completely. That's a really lovely story that that you say you get your energy from kind of seeing people flourish, and it must be so nice for you to have kind of identified that person's talent and seen their potential, and to kind of be in a position where you can enable them and you can kind of give them that leg up, and also just give them that confidence booster and the reality check that they are great the way they are. They're qualified, they have the potential to succeed if they kind of get out of their own heads. I think that really highlights something that comes up in every episode, which is especially within space, but obviously you can say it for any industry, is the power of kind of networking and mentors and people. Because people, when you're in an industry that you're so passionate about, I think people are really keen to kind of build you up and help you to kind of overcome these obstacles. And I think it's the people are a resource really in that way, aren't they, when you can help people like this and you can boost them up like that. So kind of, what would you, on that same note, what would you say throughout your journey, what were the best resources, whether that is kind of a mentor or someone that you worked with, or even like a course or a program that you've identified and utilized over the years as kind of helped you transition into where you are now?
I wish I would have understood the value of a mentor earlier in my career in helping me sort of chart my path. And I think I suffered a little bit from that because there was a lot of wandering at different times in my career. So I think finding a good mentor early on was something I wish I would have done, because that can really help accelerate one's career path. What else is there? I think also just like the value of helping others. So I think at least a lot of time in my profession, relationships can be incredibly transactional. You have a hot deal, everyone wants to be your friend. You're on a rough patch, nobody wants to talk to you. And I think that's a huge mistake, because I don't think I think yes, it's ultimately transactional on some level, but I also think there's hidden opportunity or latent opportunity that we can't necessarily always see that is unlocked by helping others. And so and that's one of the things I think I've really enjoyed about working more specifically within the space sector, is how many entrepreneurs I see really supporting one another in the sector. And it's incredible, because I'll find out about one entrepreneur talking to another who I've known both of them for decades, didn't even know they were talking, but they just have that shared vision that really does help force multiply what either of them are working on.
Yeah, completely. I think you're so right there, and kind of finding a mentor early and also kind of nurturing even the smallest relationship or that you start with someone or a conversation you have. I think especially within space, as you said, kind of entrepreneurs supporting each other. I think so, especially within the space industry, I think 9 times out of 10, you're going to cross paths with someone again in another project. It might be completely separate, but I think once you kind of get more embedded into the industry, you can really see, like, when I joined EVONA, I was sending out connections to people on LinkedIn that I knew were important. And I started sending out other ones and I was kind of branching out a bit more. And I thought, oh wow, everyone already knows each other. And it becomes so clear. And you can see that people have been working together for years. And, it's such a culture of kind of building each other up. And I think what that comes down to is the value of, especially if you're kind of looking to move your way through the space sector or even just familiarize yourself with it or, progress within it, is that the people within it are your biggest tool because they're so passionate. They see themselves in you, maybe like a younger version of themselves in you, and they want to, give you the help and support that they wish that they had at that time. So kind of on the same arm, in the interest of kind of making this a teachable moment for the people listening that we're striking a chord with, what advice would you give to someone who's looking to join the space sector from either a technical or a non-technical background? Because that's something we're trying to highlight. It's not all scientists, engineers, astronauts at all. There's so many other routes into the sector. So yeah, what advice would you give to someone from a technical or a non-technical background looking to enter the sector this year or beyond?
Literally just follow what's interesting. And that's another piece of advice I wish somebody would have given me. It seems so obvious when I say it, right? Don't work on things that aren't interesting to you because you won't have the motivation and energy to see it through otherwise. And I've definitely bumped my head against a few walls figuring that out. But it's a lot simpler answer than I think people expect or want to hear. But just follow whatever is interesting, and like the energy and passion will come with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is really crucial advice. I wish, I eventually did just kind of follow what was interesting, but I kind of wish I'd been told that from a bit of a younger age, because, it might be a bit of a journey, but if you're just genuinely following a passion and an interest that you have, it might take a few years. You might, as you said, hit a few bumps in the road, a few obstacles, but the product of genuinely following what you personally are passionate about and find interesting could land you the absolute job of your dreams, but dreams beyond dreams that you may have never even knew that kind of job existed. I think that's, the power of saying yes to opportunities and the power of also, maybe saying no to opportunities if it's not aligned with what you're aiming for. I think there's so much space in the space. So there's so much room in the space. There's so many space firms, God, I'm drowning in them. It's, there's so many different things you can do. And if you just keep following that genuine passion you have, who knows where you're going to end up, but it's going to be somewhere absolutely incredible that, you probably beyond your wildest imagination might never have even dreamed you could be there. So Jeff, final question. We're coming to a close now. We're running out of time, but it's been incredible to hear about your journey. You've got some really, really tangible pieces of advice that you kind of learned along the way. Maybe some you learned the hard way, but now you're in a position where you have learned from them. You're incredibly successful at what you're doing, and you can use this experience and what you've learned to help other people who are looking to kind of, maybe they haven't even taken their first steps yet. Maybe they're just looking to join the sector, or maybe they do have their sights set on something maybe kind of more similar to what you're doing. So we've spoken about the journey. We've got some tangible pieces of advice for people in terms of employment and mentoring and kind of development, just to kind of span back to the wider space sector. In your understanding and your broad understanding of the sector, what are your thoughts on the current status of the space sector, and how do you see this evolving over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
I think there will be increased focus on the space sector given the geopolitical landscape and where that's heading. I think we've gone through a hype cycle the last few years, highlighted or punctuated by SPACs. and the plethora of space companies we saw do that. And obviously that was all top of the market behavior. Things aren't looking as great right now. So I expect there to be a lot of consolidation as a result of, a lot of good technology becoming increasingly cheap and fewer investors to support it. So I think we'll see a lot of consolidation across, a number of different industries within the space sector. I'm still holding out hope for another launch company at some point. But and I think that's actually a really important thing I don't hear a lot of people talking about, which is, yeah, Starship, great, but there's one show in town right now. We in sort of the future that we're staring down the barrel of, we probably would benefit from having more than one successful launch company globally. And so, why it's great to see companies like ISAR, for example, raising that monstrous, not monstrous, that's a terrible way to put it, huge round.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very exciting outlet. Very exciting times ahead in the most exciting sector in the world, in the universe, I would say. Very much so. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. I've really enjoyed speaking with you again. Loved hearing your story. I was really excited to kind of hear how you started out, because I knew it would be a good one, because you're very interesting jobs that you do now. Yeah, I was really interested to kind of hear how you found your way there. And, for anyone listening, we've got some great pieces of advice here. Follow them, really think about it, follow what you're passionate about, and who knows what the future will hold for you.
I never know. But thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
You're very welcome. Thanks again for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll speak soon.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye, you too. Bye.